ReachX with me series. My name is Mehdi. I'm with ReachX, and we're welcome today David Sims, who is a ReachX advisor. Hi, David. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's super cool to have you on, and the topic we're going to about today is a very sexy topic because everyone is talking about this these days, electric vehicles and their challenges. So we'll deep dive right now into the understanding a little bit with you the impact of the adoptions of EVs. First question, maybe before we kick off the topic about EVs, can you please introduce yourself and tell us who you are, David?
Sure, of course. So my name is David Sims. My professional history or career history is that I spent a good 20 to 25 years working in the credit markets. And then more recently, after a sort of brief interlude doing some entrepreneurial things, decided to do a master's at UCL in environmental economics and energy. And currently I am working at an NGO, which is the Climate Bonds Initiative. So that's my background.
That's amazing. So now let's deep dive into the topic of the impact of EVs, and the adoption of EVs, electric vehicles. A lot of stuff is happening right now. First of all, I want to understand, in terms of trends, like how fast are EVs going to replace all the ICE vehicles in the UK, especially? So
if we look at the UK in particular. I would think that most people are aware that purchases of electric vehicles and hybrids are growing exponentially. And in 2021, over 20% of all new passenger vehicles are either EV or hybrid. And normally you would build a kind of diffusion curve for new technologies and see where you estimate those when you estimate that's going to get to 100. But in the UK, it's a little easier because the UK has a stated policy aim such that no ICEs will be sold in the UK after 2030. And de facto, that means that all sales of passenger vehicles will be presumably electric vehicles, unless another technology like hydrogen comes in, which no one's expecting. So, and then generally, it's expected that hybrids will then also be phased out by about 2035, which is in line with the Climate Change Committee's recommendations. And given those statistics, it's fairly easy using reasonable assumptions, such as the average useful life of a car and how many cars are going to be purchased each year, to model the effects on the total fleet. And so the effect of that would be that by about 2040, over 90% of all existing cars are expected to be either battery electric vehicles or hybrid electric vehicles. And by 2045, that might be over 95%, with the majority of those being battery, not hybrid.
That's huge, David.
Yeah, it's a big change. And what's driving the change? Well, public awareness, policy.
Yeah.
I mean, transport accounts for 30% of emissions in the UK and most developed economies, so it's something we have to address.
Yeah.
At the same time, electric vehicles costs are going down. The 30 to 40% of the cost of batteries, and battery costs have fallen by 80% since 2010 and are expected to fall a further 40% by 2030. Now, in addition to that, even currently, the average cost of owning a car over its lifetime is now lower for battery electric vehicles versus ICEs. So it's really upfront costs that get in the way of purchases. So those are the drivers.
That's amazing. And in terms of I would say the next challenge, for the, I mean, a change like the one you've mentioned right now is not without consequences. I mean, what are we expecting in terms of impact? And what I mean by impact is really the entire chain, because you put a lot of electric vehicles on the market. Obviously, that you need to recharge them. Based on also the infrastructure that is existing, based on the demand, etc. Like, how are we gonna forecast, and how are we gonna see some differences, and what is really the impact that we should expect?
Well, a lot of work is being done on this and has been done on this, both by the government, by think tanks, and by the national grid, for instance. So, for instance, one of the biggest impacts, obviously, is the increase in electricity demand. So, and it's not just that goes hand in hand. It's not just electric vehicles that are going to impact electricity. The electrification of energy feeds through to cars, heating, and industry. And estimates by say the national grid expect demand to double by 2050, which is a big change. And that change in demand, or the increase in demand, has to be dealt with whilst also needing to decarbonize the whole of the electricity sector in its entirety, because that's actually what net zero means. You have to decarbonize completely. So, so not only will this mean we need to build additional generating capacity, which we'll do through various means like wind farms, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, etc. But also that the transmission infrastructure will have to be upgraded to deal with the existing capacity. Within that sort of doubling number on electricity, passenger EVs are expected to comprise sort of a third to half of the increase, which is not difficult to calculate, because if you know how many cars you've got on the road, the energy needed per mile or kilometer, and how far they drive every year, then you'll know the amount of energy or the electricity that's needed. And then but the problem of meeting that required demand is exacerbated by charging behavior of owners. And for those not familiar with energy generation and demand, traditionally electricity has to be consumed when it's generated, and vice versa. So, and left to their own devices, consumers tend to charge their cars when they get home, which coincides with peak demand. So in other words, that's when you turn your lights on, when you turn your heating on, when you do your cooking. So that would, without intelligent management, that would lead to the need to build a considerable amount of additional generating capacity. So on the electricity side, that is the main challenge. Sorry, I can't hear you. You've gone.
In the impact of the vehicles, David, when you mentioned earlier the impact of the vehicles, yeah. I wanted to I really understand, are we really ready for such an adoption of EVs?
Well, there are two broad issues here. Firstly, can we meet the required electricity demand? And as I mentioned, the National Grid, together with BEIS, which is the Department for Business, Energy and Industry, which is quite involved or aware of the broad need to meet and the additional demand and are planning accordingly. Yeah. But the other issue is obviously charging infrastructure and the ability of owners to charge their cars. So with regard to public infrastructure, we currently have, depending on the definition, 20,000 to 40,000 public charging points. Now, the Climate Change Committee estimates that we'll need 220,000 by 2030. However, the SMMT, which is a major industry body, estimates that we're going to need 2 million, and I'd be sort of edging more towards that number. And we have to note that 1 in 3 owners of cars don't even have access to their own off-street parking, which means they have to rely on public charging or street charging. And then when you start to think about home charging, the increase in electricity usage at home, especially when combining car demand with the electrification of everything else like heating, which uses quite a lot of energy, may require, or probably will require, upgrades of electricity delivery into individual houses and residences. And that's because of the way we deliver energy nationally. It's sort of broken down. You start with a 3-phase, and then it's broken down to a single phase when it goes into houses, and that needs to be changed. Now, to do that individually, for one person to do that, it's expensive, and so that needs a plan. essentially.
And so we have now, in terms of like the demand, if we have like I would say, strain on the demand, what can we really do to kind of like mitigate that risk and that demand issue?
Yeah, well, there are ways to mitigate the risk certainly in terms of charging behavior.
Yeah.
This is quite logical and obvious when you think about it. But if people can be persuaded to charge their cars off peak demand, then that can make quite a large difference. And this is known as smart charging. And it can be incentivized through things like electricity pricing, whereby consumers really feel the difference in the prices and understand the difference in the prices of peak demand and charging their cars when electricity is cheap, like in the middle of the night, and i.e. when other demand is low. Shifts such as that, you know, in extreme, if you can stress models to show that could be estimated or modeled to reduce peak demand by 20%. Now, to put that in perspective, that has a material effect on the base load, or the non-intermittent generating capacity needed for the electricity system. So to put this in perspective, in extreme, it could save the UK from building 3 to 4 Sizewell C power plants, for example, if that's all they were using as base load, and those cost 20 billion each. So it's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's like a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Sorry, David.
Another interesting dynamic is that the total pool of electric vehicle passenger car batteries could be used as electricity storage capacity to complement grid generation. And this is known as vehicle to grid or V2G charging. So to give you an idea, the total energy storage capacity of EV cars in the UK could be estimated by 2050 to be 2 to 3 terawatt hours. Now that's 10 to the 12 watt hours in maths, and that's 2 to 3 times the total current daily UK consumption. And well, how does that work? Well, you know, passenger cars actually spend 95% of their total time parked, and the average mileage driven per day by owners is around 28 miles. So with management, you could see that people could arrange for their cars to communicate with the grid, which is obviously possible, and allow a certain amount of energy to be taken from their batteries. And how that works is that owners could actually earn money by allowing their batteries to charge when energy is cheap, i.e., for instance, when demand is low, when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and allow energy to be used when it's expensive. And that could just be like 10 to 15% of the total capacity of the battery. And actually, some studies show that actually increases battery life as well. So now, estimates also show that owners could earn, you know, £1,000 to £2,000 a year. Now, for some people, that's a lot of money. And so to put that in perspective, over 5 to 10 years, that could be a quarter of the cost of a Tesla, for instance. Yeah. You know, that's significant when considering the economics of buying a car. And in addition, this further reduces the need for expensive baseloads, so saving the need to build the equivalent of another, say, 2, maybe more nuclear power stations. So in extreme, you know, if only that was used as battery, only that was used as baseload backup. And more to the point, the marginal costs of V2G are low because EV batteries will already exist to power cars, and charging infrastructure will already exist to charge the cars. So it's really more about the communication and the sort of adapters between the cars and the power system that cost. So it's actually a good solution. The government is actually aware of it. So we can expect, you know, there's a good chance it becomes part of the planning for the system as a whole.
Yeah, it's super insightful, and thank you very much, David. You know, for these superb insights. I have a bonus question for you, for the people who really want to, you know, mindful of the time. So you have to bear it in mind, and I know that we need to wrap up in a few minutes. We have just a few minutes left. For people who are right into also find opportunities within the energy sector, what do you see right now, according to you, as which part of the value chain is right now driving the most traction from an employment perspective?
Well, so I think if you're looking at sort of more of like the EV sector, there's a lot of areas there where the whole sort of system is going to change. So, for instance, I think as soon as you start looking at electric vehicles and batteries and charging infrastructure, you're automatically sort of becoming, rather than being part of the demand, you're already becoming part of the supply. And that dynamic becomes quite interesting because how you use the battery, within a smart home or within larger organized mini grid, it could be very interesting.
Yeah.
So there are, that then leads on to, are there opportunities for aggregation and organizing that power supply? So, in physical terms, you could think of an aggregation as a car park, but actually virtual. So those are interesting opportunities. And there are other opportunities. So, for instance, in different ways, we've touched on the fact that batteries are a large upfront cost. So battery financing can be interesting because batteries can then be used after their useful life for a car and used for then storage for the grid. And so there are models to do there.
Yeah.
I think servicing could also be quite useful, quite interesting sort of area to explore in terms of electric vehicles and offshoots from the industry.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, super insightful. A big thank you for joining us today, David. And we're really looking forward to maybe chatting with you soon again, in a few months, like to understand a little bit about the changes, dynamics in the environment, and the changes a little bit in the industry. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Welcome.